Today's video was requested by Toady Hector. Thanks for your support. Final Fantasy gave us a lot of legendary creatures to build around. One such is the Emperor of Palamecia, a 2/2 human noble wizard for 1 each of blue and red mana. He has 2 abilities. 1, he can tap to add 1 mana of our choice of blue or red, but that mana may only be used to cast a non-creature spell. The second ability is a triggered ability. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, put a +1/+1 counter on the Emperor, then, if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, transform it. It then transforms into the Lord Master of Hell, a 3/3 demon noble wizard with Starfall. Whenever the Lord Master of Hell attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of non-creature, non-land cards in our graveyard. This is a powerful card design, to be quite frank. The Emperor himself acts as a mana dork for our non-creature spells, but also accrues +1/+1 counters as we cast more mana-hungry spells. This can trigger also off of X-costed spells, as long as we invest enough mana to reach that 4 mana threshold. When it transforms, not only does it retain those counters, but it then becomes a menace of a creature, able to burn each opponent whenever it attacks. There is an importance to the way the Lord Master of Hell's ability is worded. Since it is he who is dealing the damage to each opponent, there is some potential for an Infect style deck should you choose to run cards like Grafted Exoskeleton. However, I want to make this deck interesting, and another Infect deck on the channel might make people think I'm a toxic player. So to that end, I will be building this deck to take advantage of casting non-creature spells and aiming to get that payoff of reaching 3 +1/+1 counters to transform our commander. Unintuitively, we are running a handful of creatures who will look to give us added benefit to casting non-creature spells. See, while that threshold of 4 mana isn't really too difficult to reach, I think it would be wise to build us an early game value engine out of other cards that either have prowess or prowess adjacent abilities. Dragon's Rage Channeler lets us Surveil 1 whenever we cast a non-creature spell. This is tremendously useful as our commander's transform side burns each opponent based on the contents of our graveyard, and this is a very easy way to help us fill up the graveyard with relevant cards. What's more is as long as we've got 4 or more card types among the cards in our graveyard, the channeler gets +2/+2, has flying, and has to attack each combat if able. So what we have here is a 1/1 for 1 mana that fills our graveyard, and then later on becomes a 3/3 flyer that will threaten life totals. Coruscation Mage is one of a handful of otter cards that have made it into this list. This creature pings each opponent whenever we cast a non-creature spell, but the added bonus is that we can make a 1/1 token copy of it using the Offspring ability upon casting the mage. We aren't so much a burn deck, though having this ability early game means that we can chip away at life totals while we play our cards without even having to enter combat, and doubling up on the ability with the Offspring token can make this an even quicker approach. Harmonic Prodigy is a uniquely powerful card in this deck, giving us a triggered doubling effect for all of our shamans or our other wizards. I'd like to remind you that both sides of our commander are in fact wizards, and most creatures in this deck are either wizards or shamans, meaning any value that we glean from their abilities is doubled. Speaking of wizards, here's another one. Kitsa Otterball Elite. This is a 1/3 otter wizard for 2 with both vigilance and prowess. We can tap Kitsa to draw a card, then discard a card, or we can pay 2 and tap Kitsa to copy target instant or sorcery spell we control, choosing new targets for the copy. This second activated ability can only be used if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. This offers us a ton of value. Obviously, the prowess will make it easier to reach that 3 power requirement, but it also having a loot ability will also help us set up our graveyard for later. Our next few cards are actually from the Final Fantasy set, giving us some on-theme flavor in our deck. Shantotto, Tactician Magician, is a 0/4 for 3 mana that has a triggered ability whenever we cast a non-creature spell. Shantotto gets +X/+0 until the end of turn, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Should that value be 4 or greater, we draw a card. This plays very nicely into the theme of this deck of mid-range non-creature spells, giving us some card draw and a creature that gets more powerful the more non-creature spells we play. Vivi Oniater is a 0/3 for 3 mana that has an activated ability where we pay 0 mana to add X mana in any combination of red or blue mana, where X is Vivi's power. We can only use this ability once during our turn. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we put a +1/+1 counter onto Vivi, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. I know a lot of people would probably prefer this to be in the command zone because of the infinite combo it goes into using Quicksilver Elemental. This deck isn't about Vivi, so they'll get a nice spot in the 99 as a mana dork and a pinger. Tella, Great Sage, has a single ability, giving us a 1/1 colorless hero creature token whenever we cast a non-creature spell. Again, should that spell have had 4 more mana used on it, we get to draw 2 cards. Should it have been given 8 or more mana, we sacrifice Tella, and it deals that much damage to each opponent. This is a great way to draw additional cards and generating us some creature tokens off our non-creature spells that can serve as blockers. Stormkiln Artist doesn't quite have a prowess ability, but whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, we create a treasure token. We also have Birgi, God of Storytelling, in the deck, and both of these serve as a means to continue our momentum. We could string spells into one another, getting mana off of them to continue casting further spells and extending towards our endgame. Finally, Bria, Riptide Rogue, comes in as the only non-shaman, non-wizard in the deck, curiously enough. This 3/3 Otter Rogue has prowess, and gives our other creatures prowess, even if it gives them just an additional instance of this ability. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, target creature we control cannot be blocked this turn. So one of the unique approaches to this deck is that it isn't quite a spell slinger deck, and it isn't quite an aggressive turn creatures sideways and hope for the best kind of deck either. We use our non-creature spells to accrue value, build up our board state, and then once we have enough force, we swing out at opponents. It should be easy to build up a few creatures and render them unblockable to swing at opponents for game. Now, for a non-creature deck discussion to begin with creature spells, you'd think whoever wrote this script might not exactly know what they're doing. And you're right. Let's now discuss the non-creature spells of relevance, namely the ones that can be cast using 4 or more mana. Aetherize is a fantastic means to defend ourselves against an opponent making aggressive plays towards us, bouncing back all of their attacking creatures. Cyclonic Rift is another option and is in the deck as one of the game changer cards, but I do have a fondness for Aetherize as a less mana intensive spell that really just protects ourselves and also fits into our deck strategy. Big Score allows us to pitch a card and draw 2 cards and generate 2 treasure tokens. There are actually a number of spells that are functionally the same as this, being a 4 mana spell that draws us cards and makes us treasure. Some of them cost 2, but this one being an instant gives it flexibility to be used in response to another spell, possibly changing our board composition and giving us an advantage in a pinch. Decaying Time Loop is a 4 mana self-wheel, letting us discard our entire hand and then draw the same number of cards. This works great with our commander as it has Retrace, letting us recast it from the graveyard as long as we pitch a land in addition to its casting cost. It also helps us bulk up that graveyard. Gifts Ungiven is a card that I wanted to test in this deck, letting us choose up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. An opponent will choose 2 of them to go to the graveyard and 2 of them to go to our hand. Think of it as a far more powerful fact or fiction, giving us the ability to get the best cards to our hand and set up a powerful move. Rewind and Spell Swindle are 2 counterspells I don't normally run, but both of them cost 4 mana or greater and both come with some excellent payoff. Rewind untaps up to 4 lands, and then Spell Swindle will give us treasures equal to the mana value of the countered spell. Astrologian's Planisphere is a 2 mana equipment that has Job Select, giving us a 1/1 colorless hero creature token as this card enters, and then we attach the Planisphere to that token. The equipped creature is a wizard in addition to its other types, and has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and whenever you draw your 3rd card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This works so nicely with our commander, as it gives us those +1/+1 counters to hasten us to transform into the Lord Master of Hell. Empowered Auto-Generator is a 4 mana rock that slowly accumulates charge counters that'll give us more mana when we tap it for mana. Our deck does need a decent bit of mana acceleration since we do want to cast multiple spells per turn, and 4 mana per spell is a bit ravenous. Mind Splice Apparatus is a 4 mana artifact that gets an oil counter during each of our upkeeps. This also makes instants and sorceries we cast cost 1 less mana for each oil counter on the apparatus. This is a great way to ramp up our instants and sorceries, and while we do only run a single X-costed sorcery, we can use this to help pay for the X in the cost to scale that effect. Artist's Talent is an all-star in this deck, giving us a rummage effect whenever we cast a non-creature spell, feeding further into our commander's burn ability. At level 2, it makes our non-creature spells cheaper to cast. Finally, at level 3, if a source we control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent they control, it deals 2 additional damage. Our commander will then be getting in for an additional 2 points of damage per opponent dished out. Considering this is not only a 2-drop, but a non-creature spell as well, this plays in about as nicely as you could ask for this early game. Sorcerer class is a 2-mana spell as well, and as it enters, we draw 2 and discard 2. Great graveyard setup. At level 2, creatures we control can then tap to add 1 mana of either blue or red, and then that mana can only be used to cast an instant, a sorcery, or to gain a class level, basically turning our creatures into mana dorks. Finally, at level 3, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, that spell deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instant and sorcery spells that we've cast this turn. This is about as close to a storm ability as we reach in this deck, letting us burn opponents for an increasing amount of damage as we continue to play our spells. Again, this deck can work well whittling down life totals without ever having to enter combat. Now, our final section will be about payoffs. We do want to play a few big flashy spells that will hasten our victory. Nibelheim of Flame is a 4-mana sorcery. We choose target creature we control, and then it deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. Should we have paid 7 mana to cast it from the graveyard with flashback, we can also discard our hand and draw 4 cards. This can be used to clear off the battlefield to make way for our largest creatures to swing in. I also love this for the self-wheel effect. Seize the Day has great synergy with our commander, being best played during our post-combat main phase. We untap our commander, then we get an additional combat phase where we can swing in, preferably with the transformed side that burns opponents for a second round of damage. Should we have the mana, we can then cast this once more from the graveyard, then exile it for the 3rd shot. And if we haven't won by then, I'm really not sure what we did wrong. Chandra's Ignition is a great way to use our bulked up creatures to finish off the table, especially since this will only impact our opponents. If we've managed to burn the table down to the point where our opponents are barely holding on, this can be the final nail in the coffin. If you're the monstrous type, that's also included the aforementioned grafted exoskeleton, because you wanted infect in your deck. Props to you. This does help bulk up those infect counters, since it is the creature itself dealing that damage. Immolating Gyre is a 6-mana sorcery that deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker we don't control, where X is the number of instants and sorceries in our graveyard. This can be used as a board wipe to prepare the battlefield for our Alpha Strike. Hit the Motherlode is one of my favorite red spells, letting us discover 10. To discover 10, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card with mana value of 10 or less. We exile that spell without paying its mana cost, or we can add it to our hand. The other exiled cards from this ability go to the bottom of the library in a random order. Finally, if the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, we create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. Since our average spell's mana value is about 2 mana, we have a very strong likelihood of creating a ton of treasure tokens to help us ramp even further. Finally, Seagate Restoration is a 7-mana sorcery that lets us draw cards equal to the number of cards in our hand plus 1, and then we have no maximum hand size for the remainder of the game. I'm not as much of a fan of the old school Omniscience Enter the Infinite combo these days, but this is a rather nice substitute that will draw us a ton of cards late game and help us hold onto our cards. And then if we don't need it for some reason, it also does function as a land. We do also have one Planeswalker, which technically does count as a non-creature spell, with Ral Crackling Wit, a 4-mana, for loyalty, Ral Planeswalker. He has a static ability. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we put a loyalty counter on Ral. We can +1 him to create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. Solid creature token generation. We can -3 him to draw 3 cards and then discard 2. Lastly, his -10 allows us to draw 3 cards, and then we get an emblem that gives our instants and sorceries Storm. Storm won't trigger any of our prowess abilities or any of the adjacents, but it will give us additional copies of our spells that will merely give us extra value. Getting 3 additional copies of Chandra's Ignition because we've got a storm count of 3 is pretty wild, and it will help us close out games pretty soundly. The best way to run this deck is to make sure we can get the Emperor out early on, so we don't miss out on the value we had in casting subsequent non-creature spells. Getting our card draw engines online early will ensure that we never run out of spells to play, and chaining a few after one another to transform our commander will help us play a much faster game. We don't mind the discard and wheel effects as much simply because we are looking in part to bulk up our non-creature, non-land cards in the graveyard so we maximize the Lord Master of Hell's attack trigger. While we string our opponents along our spell slinging nonsense, we can also use our normal creatures to just get in some damage, as nearly all of them will benefit from our spell play. Something like Balmor Battlemage Captain will give our battlefield Trample, giving us an alternative option with Trample should Bria be unavailable to give us just unblockability. Now, while it isn't in the deck, you can choose to run Mizzix's Mastery as an alternate win condition, which gives you either a 4 mana or possibly 8 mana spell that will give you an additional copy of each instant and sorcery in your graveyard that you can cast for free. This does kind of non-bow with our commander as he wants cards in our graveyard for the greatest effect, but if your spell assortment is more based on cards that give you value in the form of cantrips or removal or straightforward burn spells, maybe consider it. Another option that would add much more Final Fantasy flair would be to lean into cards like Ice Magic and Thunder Magic, both of which have the tiered abilities that allow you to spend more mana to get our commander's ability to trigger. At the end of the day, how you build your deck is entirely up to you. I do hope that this video has been inspiring to your deck building. If you enjoyed it, likes and shares are the best ways to help this channel grow. If you're new here and you like what you see, subscribe so you never miss a video. The link to the full Moxfield deck list will be included in the video description for your perusal. And as always, I appreciate you watching. I'm Flynn, and I'll catch you all next time.